3, 2, 2.5, 7.9, pi. I believe we're live. Welcome to the live stream. My name is Patrick Coffin. You may have seen me or heard me on my podcast, oddly called The Patrick Coffin Show. I'm also the co-founder of Coffin Nation, which is an international community of culture builders. Most of us are Catholics. All of us are rowing in the same direction to repair the DNA damage done to the culture. We're going to do a live stream with someone I recently met, and we have a lot of people in common, and I really started paying attention back in October when he released a very scaldingly real commentary on YouTube about his experience as a child, both as a family member and also as an actor. Bug Hall's been in 40, 50 movies. His big debut was as Alfalfa in the Spielberg reboot of The Little Rascals. He joins us now from his idyllic homestead somewhere near Temperance, Michigan. Bug Hall, nice to see you, sir.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
It's a kind of place name that you'd think would belong in a Faulkner novel or something. It's a very evocative and, in your case, appropriate word for a place to be from. Yeah.
It's an interesting town. It can go either way. It can be Norman Rockwell or it can be a murder mystery. Who knows?
Right.
Who knows?
A little bit of Mayberry, a little bit of Twin Peaks.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bug, you self-canceled. Maybe we can start with a rewind back to your decision to show up at this audition and meet the people in Hollywood. You had, I suppose, maybe been in a couple of plays. What was your very first splash into the Hollywood sphere? What was that like? What was on your mind at the time, if you can remember?
I do. It's funny. I have crystal clear memories of when I was really young, and then large gaps after that. But I heard about the audition for Little Rascals. My sister was at a dance studio. She was a clogger. And so they had like flyers up. Spielberg had this idea he wanted all non-actors. So they went around the country and they put flyers up anywhere and everywhere they could think of. And they had these big open calls all over the country, Chicago and Dallas, all the big cities. And I knew of Little Rascals. My mom ran a daycare at our house, and it was one of the few things we watched. People always told me I looked like Alfalfa. I wanted to do it. So I convinced my mom to take us, and some of my friends were going. I remember the line, it was like a 4-hour wait. And I never questioned whether I was going to get the part or not. To me, my mentality was I'm just going to show up and I'm going to get the job, and that's how it works. So it was an interesting experience. I used to watch the Rascals when I was waiting for the audition. I'd watch the Rascals and I'd rewind it and I'd mimic Alfalfa. Mm-hmm. And of course, I had no idea what was in store for me. There were no sides to study or anything like that. It was just kind of a big cattle call. So I cut my rat's tail off. I did my hair up. I was all prepped. I went in and I was in there for about maybe 30 seconds. They asked me a couple questions and they said, "Okay, thank you, bye." And I remember thinking, no, it can't be over that quick. So I said, "Hey, can I sing a song for you?" And you can't tell an 8-year-old kid no, right? So they said, "Yeah, sure." And I sang "She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain" in my best Alfalfa voice. And I think that was it. I went through multiple callbacks after that, but I think that moment sealed the deal. The final audition was an 8-hour-long working session. And of the other 2 Alfalfas that made it to the final call, they flew us all out to Los Angeles. Only one of them even went into the room, and he only went in once. And I was there for the rest of the 8 hours. Looking back, they were clearly matching all the other casts to me. So that was it. And then I was off to rehearsals for 2 weeks, and it was one of the most exciting times of my life. I remember really feeling like my life had drastically changed, and that there was sort of no going back.
Felt like
it was a line of demarcation.
The cogs kind of aligned, and you had, even though you were 8, a lot of people remember when their vocation kind of comes into bloom. It's very often before they turn 10. So that makes sense. I just want people to understand, the level of competition that Bug just laid out. We're talking about thousands of young people that get looked at and then rejected, and then there's the next level of the pyramid until the very top of the pyramid. Weeks later, sometimes months later, then it comes down to a short list. And this is typical, isn't it, Bug, where the shortlisted actors for a given part are thrown into the same rehearsal area, so that you know your competitor.
Yeah. So, and especially in this one, because what they were essentially doing was a mix and match, which is where you're all sitting around. There's three or four actors for each role, and you're all sitting around in a room together, and they're just sort of randomly picking, okay, you, and you, and then seeing which combinations work the best.
Yeah.
So that was, and they wanted to see who could handle the long hours. So it was an 8-hour session. Spielberg was there, Penelope Spheres, and it was, I mean, to me, it was like magic. I mean, I loved every second of it from the very first word go.
Your relatives seen it? Is it kind
My
of
relatives?
if it's your family have seen you in the role, obviously.
Yeah.
That's a trip, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. My wife didn't know that was me when we met. In fact, she didn't know for I think a couple weeks. And my daughters have never seen it. My daughter, I let her watch the first, I think, 5 minutes of it, and just to see her reaction.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah. And then you went on, just a constant flow of work for like 10, 20 years.
Yeah, close to 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I want to go gently here, but also in the knowledge that you disclose a lot in that video. People can, if you want to look it up in October. You were cast at age 8 as Alfalfa in the Little Rascals movie. What was happening at your home life at that point?
So my biological parents didn't live together. I lived with my mother and my stepfather. Stepfather's a great man. In fact, I legally took his last name before I got married, so I could pass that on to my wife and kids.
Mm-hmm.
My biological father we saw very, very rarely, and as early as I can remember, he had been abusing me, and he had been abusing me. So that was part of, I think, the excitement when I booked the movie. All of a sudden, I was halfway across the world, and I remember sort of thinking, I remember feeling, most when you're a kid, most of what you go through is just kind of sensory feeling. I remember feeling like that was all behind me, like I had escaped something, and he was already in prison by that point. So it wasn't even him physically that I felt I was escaping. It was just sort of the air of, I don't know, the oppressive memories or something that I felt like I was escaping.
May I ask if you went to jail for that?
Not for me, but for that crime in regards to other children. Nobody ever knew about me.
Okay. Was the video that you decided to do last October the first time that a lot of your family and friends learned? Because you didn't use a FBI thing with your faces all blurred out, or your voice sounds like the Hulk. It's just you kind of self-disclosing.
Yeah, that was the hardest part of the video. Was the people that were close to me that I knew would be sort of inadvertently hurt by it.
Mm-hmm.
That was hard. It was a really hard decision to make. And nobody knew other than maybe 4 or 5 of my closest friends, my wife, a couple priests, and my old friends out in Los Angeles.
At the time, Bug, was your mother and stepfather, were they Christians? Was there any kind of spiritual ambiance in the home?
Not really. No. I don't remember ever hearing about God or Christianity or anything of a supernatural with a supernatural aspect until much later in life. It just wasn't discussed. I remember one time going to a sort of a weekend Bible camp with a friend, and I remember being just so utterly confused. I had no idea what was going on. I remember them, singing the songs and talking about all these stories. And I remember just being just totally confused. And then that experience always kind of hung with me, like, what was that about? And then later in life, the context made sense, right? Of course, eventually you hear things and you see movies and you understand that there's a whole Christian world out there.
Yeah, so you cobble together the stories, and all of a sudden it's a patchwork that has a kind of coherent whole. Yeah. Was there a day when you realized that Jesus Christ was not only Lord, but that he founded a church and you wanted to belong to it? What was your conversion to the Catholic Church founded on? Was it a person, a witness, a book? How did that unfold?
It was sort of an ongoing process in a way, but it was also a flashbang in one day. So basically, my friend was going through a conversion. My old business partner, he had done a movie in Mexico with some Catholics, and they were sort of challenging him on these beliefs. And we had been writing together for years, and we were starting a company together. And I was concerned because I felt like I was losing my best friend and losing my business partner. All of a sudden, he has all these wild ideas about what we can or can't put in scripts, and it was concerning to me. So I started researching. I was always a history fan, so all I knew of the Catholic Church were the touchstone historical marks that the secular world uses to sort of beat Catholics with.
Right.
So I was
first the Resurrection, then the Crusades, then the Inquisition.
Right.
Yeah.
As the Inquisition, it's Galileo, the Crusades, so I kind of went down that list and started deep diving on some research, hoping to counter these people that were converting my friend. And the more I dug into those events, the more they look not just excusable, but actually good, right? Each one of those is a morally good. And you start to realize the Catholic Church is historically one of the most beautiful things in the world, right? So that was making me uncomfortable, but it was easy to put out of my mind because it's still ancient history, and still doesn't really, it still doesn't resemble any of the modern church, from what I'm seeing as an outsider who's barely peeking over the wall. And my friend, him and his brother had started praying for me. They sat down one night and they said, "Who's the least likely person we know to convert?" This is how they explained it to me later. And they decided that was me. So they started praying for me every day for about a year. Right around the year mark, there's this psychology conference at a friend's house. And my buddy invites me. He says, "You got to come to this psychology conference. It'll really help with the script we're working on." We were working on a script about vice and addiction in teenagers. Mm-hmm. And, I said, "All right, yeah, that sounds great." He said, "The guy's a genius. He's got a master's degree. You're going to love him." So we get there, and he turns out to be a Catholic priest, full cassock. And he's a little guy, but he's a mountain of a man, and just full gravitas, And so he's going through the 7 deadly sins. And so I realized I've been duped. This is a Catholic thing, right? And I started to get frustrated once he got to a particular 7 deadly sin that would be my predominant vice, my predominant defect. I thought it was a setup. It was so accurate. It's just Thomism, but it was so accurate to human nature that I thought it was personal. I thought my friend actually pulled this guy aside, sort of laid out my history and said, say whatever you have to say to get him.
Yeah, here's how you can tailor all your Catholic voodoo to him, and then we'll rope him in.
And I was certain of it. And I was very angry, and I was sort of looking for who I should be fighting with, right? There was a break in the conference. The priest went outside to smoke a cigar, and I kind of bulldozed out onto the balcony and tried to confront him. I was very confrontational. Mm-hmm. And I was saying very stupid secular arguments for atheism and for whatever I could think of. I just wanted to be right. And he had no idea who I was. He was just kind of waving me off. And, "Oh, you're right." He's trying to smoke a cigar. I'm just annoying him. And I realized that he clearly wasn't there for me. I peeked back inside, and everyone was eating hors d'oeuvres and having a nice time and laughing and talking. And I realized none of this had anything to do with me.
Yeah.
It was right in that moment that I realized it was just true. What he was saying bothered me because it was true. So I sat down quietly and listened to the rest. just kind of in a dumbfounded state. By the time it was over, I asked my friend, so how does one become Catholic?
Yeah.
He said, well, you got to go through RCIA, and then you got to. I said, no, I want to do it now. So we found an abbey that was willing to baptize me the coming Easter, which was about a month and a half. So that was it. I went to sort of a flash course of RCIA every day for a month and a half, privately with the priests at St. Michael's Abbey, and they agreed to baptize me that coming Easter.
Amazing.
And the funny thing,
yeah, go ahead.
You hear these stories, and there's always these sort of tears of joy, and I didn't have that experience. I was angry the second I realized that Catholicism was true. I was really angry. I was angry that I had been lied to my whole life. I was angry that this thing that is so accessible to everyone was kept from me, right?
Yeah.
And that what it meant to be a man, how I grew up, sort of in this amoral, wretched society, this little microcosm of horror that is Los Angeles. I was taught the exact opposite of what it meant to be a man. Every single principle, every single virtue was 180 degrees antithetical to true masculinity and to true virtue. And it took a while for me to stop being angry about that.
I'm going to try if I can quickly do this. I just put a link into the com box here, the comment section for non-Gen Xers, of something that I think I shared with you a couple of weeks back, the parallel between what I call the Holy Church and the Catholic Church. There's a similar hierarchy, and there's been similar abuses. But before we get there, I wanted to ask you about whether you had father figures in Hollywood that cared about you, or were you sort of human chattel? How much money can Bug make me? How can this forward my career? What was the... You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, of course. It's easy to get bogged down with the horrors of what I went through. But the truth is, I naturally gravitated towards family-oriented people, towards father figures. I think because there was that hole missing. My stepfather was an amazing man, but when I was in Los Angeles, he was in Texas working, and so I had that sort of hole to be filled. And I did kind of adopt as many father figures as I could. Now, of course, that being said, that didn't go very far, right? I mean, they have their own families, they have their own lives, but I do remember, in hindsight, always kind of desperately clinging on to these trustworthy father figures. And in fact, the last one, this friend that I was talking about, in a weird way, he was my friend because of his father. His father was sort of the last father figure I glommed onto.
Yeah.
And so this friend of mine was more like an adopted brother in my mind,
How much predatorial behavior did you witness on movie sets? Of adults to children?
Yeah. So in regards to myself, quite a bit. I never saw it anywhere else. I think that's the big trick, is that it's always so compartmentalized. I thought I was alone. I didn't think there was anyone else having these experiences. And there's an interesting way to sort of create a shame around that. I think if you're aware that it's happening to lots of people, you might be more willing to speak up. You might be more willing to reach out and say, hey, this isn't right. Maybe we should both go speak to somebody about this. But I felt very alone. I didn't see it anywhere else. Ironically, after my first video, the one I released in October, one of the other Rascals did reach out to me that very same day and said that he had the same experience on that movie.
Isn't that the demonic part of it? The to use your word, the compartmentalization, where there's a kind of an evil genius to predators. They know how to shame, they know how to terrify someone young, and one of the ways to do that is to make them feel utterly isolated and unique. No one else would understand. No one would believe it, first of all. But even one other person. Go ahead.
Yeah, and you see the effects of that, because what you see, and I've spent a lot of time working through this, what you see with children who have those experiences and they grow up, they almost always fall into these sort of alt cultures. whatever that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason for that is because they've been so isolated their whole life. They're desperate for any group, any sort of safety net, a sense of camaraderie that they'll be able to feel protected within, right? We're all kind of animals, and so you see them, and of course they reach for the lowest rung, right? Because anything will do. And that was certainly true for me. I sort of clung to the rough and tumble, bikers and the guys on set who, it's funny because on one hand they are family guys, but on the other hand crews are big drinkers, they're big partiers, movie crews, right? So, and those are the normal guys. Like that, I had no bad experiences with any of those people. And so they became my sort of safety net. And more, I wanted to promote myself as that sort of rough and tumble. It's almost a safety mechanism. I mentioned this in my video. It's like that lizard in the Amazon, the brightly colored lizard. So it's dangerous and you don't try to eat it. And I think abused children take on that persona.
That they think other people can see the bright colors? You mean?
Well, they think other people can see that you're dangerous, right? If I'm a 10-year-old boy and I'm cursing and smoking cigarettes and trying to drink whiskey with the big guys, I look dangerous. The horrible thing about that is that it works, which says something about these predators, right? It says that and this is my own opinion, in what I've deduced, what they're after, the awful, horrible pleasure that they're after is actually a destruction of innocence.
Yeah.
That's what they're seeking, because when that is no longer represented, they no longer prey upon you.
Because you as a victim you become too old for their taste?
You no longer represent any sense of innocence, and so you're not pursued. At least that was my experience. Once I reached a certain threshold of sort of rough and tumble persona, all the abuse sort of stopped overnight, which was around 11, 12. Right?
It stopped.
Yeah.
What stopped it?
Looking back, I think it was the fact that I had that persona about me. Everything
I see what you mean. Yeah, like maybe if the kid's this crazy to smoke and drink, maybe he can, backlash me, or like something bad will happen if I try something.
Maybe. I really do personally think that it's that the desire isn't there for them anymore. I think once that innocence is no longer represented, you're no longer a target, right? It's like an apple that's fallen to the ground and rotted. You don't have an instinct to pick it up and take a bite, right?
Yeah. Here's a really dumb question. Were they all adult males or any females?
No, all adult males.
Did you see Amy Berg's Open Secret documentary?
Who?
Amy Berg directed a documentary called Open Secret, and it's on pedophilia, how rife it is in Hollywood, and it kind of validates what Corey Haim has been saying. If you're paying attention, a lot of former child actors have this very similar narrative to share. Elijah Wood, come to
when
mind.
You get old, you start talking about it, right?
Yeah.
So, I had friends that were sort of big brother type figures for me, Brad Renfro being one of them. And when we worked together, we became very close. I idolized him. I looked up to him in every way, and I just clung to him. And he was gracious enough to take me under his wing, and we just ran around and got into trouble together. And there were multiple times when he would, in sort of a veiled way, but yet clear enough for me to know exactly what he was talking about. He would say, you really got to watch out there. There's going to be people that are going to, try to do things to you. In hindsight, when he ended up overdosing, he was sober for a long time, and then he overdosed and died. And it kind of sticks a knife in you when you see those stories, because in a way he was warning me and protecting me. And in another way, maybe he was reaching out and hoping that someone else would say, yes, you're right. Let's go fix this. I've had this experience too. Let's go talk to somebody,
Yeah.
None of us at that age, even 14, 15, when it's finally kind of coming out under the surface in the subtext of what we're saying to each other, none of us are still sort of courageous enough to say, okay, look, stop it. I know what you're talking about, and we need to actually do something about this. I was at a testing for an AMC show with Corey Haim a few months before he overdosed. And we had a long conversation, both chain smoking cigarettes outside. Neither of us got it. We actually lost the job to Vanilla Ice. No joke. But me and him sat out there and talked for hours. And although there was nothing explicit, it was that same kind of circling around and hinting at the horrors of our childhoods,
Yeah.
And we had met before. That was the first time we had met.
Right. Just ranging around the thing, capital T.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe he just wanted somebody to say, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and let's go get fixed,
Who knows? It's easy to speculate. Maybe Brad Renfro was also a victim, and that's what gave him that kind of radar and protectiveness toward you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that I'm certain of that. Yeah.
The whole thing to break here isn't it true? Is the taboo to even say the word, just to mention, to kind of blurt it out.
Well, that's the interesting thing about this subject. The Me Too movement, I think, gained steam relatively easy. And this is one of those things that I would argue has been actually pointed at and discussed to a certain degree for much longer by much more credible sources. I mean, that's not to put down anyone that's been part of the Me Too movement. There's clearly problems there that need to be very seriously dealt with. And I'm an extremist, so when I say that, I mean it. But I think it's interesting that you can't say the word pedophilia, right? My video in October was shadow banned because I had pedophilia in the title of it, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a strange thing that this subject is as taboo as it is, even though I think most people know it exists. You either know because you're part of the circle, or you're aware of it, or you're the general public. And I don't think anyone in the general public would be shocked in any way to find out that this is a very real problem.
Do you think the movement could also be called Him Too, putting the focus on the perpetrator instead of the victim all the time?
Yeah. I think that's certainly accurate. Yeah.
When you became a Catholic and you began to read even more, start the list with Thomas Aquinas and the Church Fathers and obviously the Word of God, at what point did the cognitive dissonance set in a little bit about the Argentine man currently in Rome and the weaponized ambiguity? And you mentioned the priest that you were talking about had a cassock. I mean, all the pearl clutchers out there. Cassock, what?
Right.
Even though the Pope himself wears a Catholic. How have you weathered the confusion and the topsy-turvy lack of clarity under Pope Francis?
It's kind of been a twofold approach for me. Is one, I had this realization at a certain point that the nature of teaching is clarity.
Amen.
If something is intentionally or maybe not intentionally, but if it's so ambiguous, if it's so obscure and impossible to access, then it isn't teaching for me, and therefore I just ignore it. If I can't understand it because of ambiguity, right? And I can read just about anything and understand it. I read St. Thomas just fine. I read Aristotle just fine. I read all the encyclicals of the church just fine up until the more recent ones, right? And so there comes a point where for me at least, I say, okay, if the nature of teaching is clarity and this seems to be intentionally unclear, then its purpose isn't teaching. Its purpose is not edification. And then the second thing is there are some times when it is clear. There's times in interviews and random you know how our Holy Father is. Um, and I just embraced the sorrow. I think our Lord has given us a great opportunity. I would say if I had to put a mark on our current culture, especially the culture of Catholics who should know better, I think that mark would be a horror of suffering, right? An avoidance, running at all costs from every suffering, even the suffering of recognizing that we might have a really bad pope and that we definitely have some really, really bad bishops.
Yeah.
That should make us sad, right? Um,
Yeah.
you
Maybe
know, all the
find. Go ahead.
well, the sort of similar analogy is when mass was shut down and all my friends were dressing up in their Sunday best to go genuflect in front of their TVs. And they put on a smile, and my wife confronted me about it. She pulled me aside because I didn't know why I didn't want to do that, but I didn't. And I couldn't articulate it. I just had some sense about it.
Yep.
And she said, all of our friends, they're keeping the Sunday tradition alive and they're pretending they're going to mass. How come we don't do that? It seems like a weird thing that we're the only ones in our group that's not doing that. And I said, I don't know. Give me some time to figure out why. But I don't know right now. And then Easter Vigil, my daughter, she was 2 at the time. We were sitting at dinner, and my wife asked, in a very pleading manner, "Can we please put the mass on TV while we're eating at least?" And I said, "Okay, that'll be fine. We're not going to watch. We're not watching the mass. We're going to be interacting with it. But we can have it on the background while we're having our dinner."
Mm-hmm.
And right at the consecration, my 2-year-old started bawling her eyes out. And I said, "Baby, what's wrong?" And she said, "I miss mass." And I started crying too, like a big baby. And I said, "I miss mass too." And it struck me right then, what a gift that sorrow is, right? And I'm not saying that anyone made the right decision in those circumstances to shut mass down. That's not my commentary here. I'm simply saying that we were given an opportunity to embrace a real sorrow and to unite it to our Lord. And I think very often we try to avoid those things. And that's the same for recognizing the problems in the church. Is maybe we just need to embrace those sorrows and then learn to contend with them.
One of the things you just said that struck me is the spirit of fear that the pandemic has not really caused, but revealed. I mean, I look at grown men in their cars driving alone, windows up with a mask on. I want to roll down my window and say, "Hey, buddy, you're dead to me." It's like, forget that it's a mass psychotic delusion that we've decided as a culture to burn the house down in order to kill a termite. It's revealed a mortal terror of dying and wanting this life is it. And I think that notion of this life is it is not only a lack of supernatural faith in heaven and in real justice from God, it's also behind the movement to eradicate the death penalty at the highest levels of the church.
Yep.
The death penalty is God's idea. Some men deserve the death penalty. It's justice, and it's not just sending a message. No, it's retributive justice. Go ahead.
If you read the medieval manuals on it, there's a deeper beauty to the death penalty, and that was the idea of sanctification, right? We can offer ourselves, right? If I've committed a crime that I can't make reparation for in this life, but I've truly repented of it and I accept my punishment. Now I can't offer my own life, right? Because suicide is intrinsically evil. Mm-hmm. But the state having that right, I am now in a position where I can offer my life in reparation. I can essentially make myself a martyr. And there is such a beauty to that. There's such a beauty. I wonder how many saints were made on death row or at the stake or whatever these horrible execution scenarios are that we would now look at as medieval and horrible and put them out of our minds. How many saints were made there?
If folks listening, this is our live stream with I was going to say a former actor. I know you're self-canceled. Will you always, to use the language of the day, will you always identify as an actor? Is that always because of your artist's heart? What's your
It's
adjective?
funny. I really am retired. I've actually had a lot of people ask me about that. I was just in LA. A friend of mine had a short that he was doing, and at first he needed help with this script, and so I pitched in there. And I ran a development company for 6 years,
Mm-hmm.
so I pitched in there. He had a low budget, and he was trying to figure out how to cast a certain character, and the character happened to have a big red beard historically. So you can guess what his pitch to me was.
Let me
And he
see.
said,
Carry the
he said,
two.
right.
Yeah.
So I did go out there and do that for him, free of charge. And, and people kept saying, "Oh, this is cool. You're doing movies now, but for Catholics." And I said, "No, no, no. I am retired. Um, I really am an ex-actor. I'm a farmer now. Now that doesn't mean I'm not going to donate my skill set, right? I have 30 years of experience in the business. People still send me scripts, and free of charge, and with whatever free time I have, I'll give them notes, and I'll say, "Go with God. I hope you pull it off, right, for the kingdom."
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's kind of one thing that I can still donate to the church. Um, it's something that I have.
There's a essay by a guy called Tom Parham called "Heathens Make the Best Christian Movies." I find it's a kind of almost a cliche that when Christians begin to write novels or movie scripts, that they just can't help themselves. They have to kind of have that messagey bullhorn
Yeah.
thing about it, as opposed to just tell a really great yarn that makes people cry, laugh, and be moved without the
Well,
catechetical overlay.
yeah, and we hate it on the other side, right? Like we all hate propaganda masquerading as art when it comes from the enemy.
Right.
I don't know why we think we can do it better.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I just went through the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius with Millis Christi priest here in California. Terrific experience. I highly recommend. I wish I had the wherewithal and the ability to do the 30-day Ignatian retreat, but one of the readings was the good thief, and the dialogue between the thief on Jesus' right and his left. And the good thief, in rebuking the bad thief, doesn't say, "Can you believe our troubles? I mean, this is totally unjust. This is permissible in no circumstances." No, he says, we're getting what we deserve. This man is innocent. And I was thinking, as you were talking about the sanctification through knowing that your days are counted. The state tells you beforehand what date you'll leave this world. I was thinking about the incident in Story of the Soul by Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, where she is praying for Henri Pranzini, the great mass murderer, if I can put it that way, in France. And her dad didn't really want her to read newspapers very much, but she stole one and had been praying for him. And she learned of the account of his death walking up the steps to the gallows, and he suddenly impulsively grabbed the hand of the chaplain and kissed the 5 wounds of the crucifix that the chaplain had handed out. And previous to that, he'd ignored it and kind of dismissed it. And that was a sign to the little flower. Yep, I got him.
Man, it's so beautiful. I think I think we sometimes forget to want heaven for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that's often lost on even the best Catholics. I know I'm guilty of it sometimes. And when I spend the time to meditate on it, I think it's such a beautiful thing that there could be saints that were made right there on death row, that in fully offering themselves as reparation and fully embracing their final suffering, that they could see God in the face, possibly immediately after their deaths, right?
Yeah, just all
I think
that super compressed expiation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Just to linger on,
I
go ahead.
beautiful.
Just to linger on the topic for one last anecdote, and that's the Sister Helen Prejean movie made from her book Dead Man Walking, directed by Tim Robbins. I think it contradicts its own thesis. When you see what happens, spoiler alert, folks, when Matthew Poncelet, played by Sean Penn, is condemned to death, it's that fact that kind of squeezes the moral clarity out of him, and he admits it, and he reconciles. If that guy had been allowed to have 30 more years, he could have organized murders from inside the big house. You
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. There's no, there's that old adage, there's no atheists in a foxhole. And I really do think that sense of imminency is a useful tool for unhardening hardened hearts.
Mm-hmm. I remember talking to a former child actor who has an organization called A Minor Consideration. His name is Paul Pearson, I believe. He was one of Donna Reed's sons in the 1950s and 60s show, The Donna Reed Show. A Minor Consideration is really for child actors and models to, I suppose, advocate against the often dangerous adult world that kids walk into. If someone's listening right now and they've got the cute as a button girl or boy and they've been told, oh, you've got a gap baby here, they're going to be a star, would you say to parents who get told that their kid is talented and would be ideal as an entertainer to run, not walk for the hills? Or is there a way that it can be navigated with proper oversight?
It's funny, if I were to add up all the times that I was recognized and then asked questions about anything, I'm asked far more often about how to get my kid into the business than I am about the business itself, right? That's always the leading question. As soon as they realize you were a child actor, I've got the cutest kid in the world, and I've already been taking them to modeling classes and whatever, and acting classes, and they're great in their school show. How do I get them into Hollywood? Now, for years, because I considered myself a public figure and I had to kind of do the PC thing, I would just say, well, I would say guard them really closely, and I would dance around the subject. Now, since about a month before October, when I made my video, I've just been telling people the same thing. Just don't do it. You're not going to listen to me. I know you're not going to listen to me, but don't do it. If a guy with 30 years experience in the business has anything to say about it, it's this: keep your kids as far away from it as possible, and even as an adult, stay away as far away as possible. I don't believe that there is any good to be done there. I think it's a rotten culture. I think it's a rotten city. And I had a lot of friends in LA, even up to the day I left. There's definitely decent people there, but no decent person is in charge of Hollywood, right? It's the mob, right? It's the mob mentality. Give us Barabbas, right? It takes like 3% or 4% to drive the entire mob, and that's kind of how Hollywood is. The rotten culture. Maybe it's a smaller percentage, but they run the thing. Just stay away. Ignore it.
Maybe the granddaddy of all this is Harvey Weinstein, whose depredations and perversions were known by literally many hundreds of people. Whole careers were made from his green light. He was feared. He was obviously falsely worshipped. And you look out and you think, as an outsider, why didn't some husband KO the guy?
Yeah. Well, there's that great story about Brad Pitt.
I was just going to bring that up. Yeah. Do you remember that?
It made me suddenly like Brad Pitt when I heard that. Yeah. I mean, look, everybody knows, right? When I was 18 years old, which would have been 20 years ago. Yeah. Wow. Almost 20 years ago. I was working in Nova Scotia, and the entire crew had just finished a movie with Kevin Spacey. And every single person, it was the running joke on set. Yeah, good thing you got here after Spacey left, because you'd especially have to be watching out for him. Everybody knows all the time. And by the way, you said, Weinstein being the granddaddy of them all. I doubt that's even the case, right? I mean, the reality is Weinstein was just the guy that took the fall.
You think he was scapegoated to a certain degree, Bug?
I think so, yeah. I think that's always the case in these situations. They find a scapegoat, and then they all start seeing who can step back quicker, right? And not getting caught in the line of fire. It's like it's like none of them want to be seen stepping back, but they'll just kind of, if you look back in the media around the Me Too movement, when it really started bursting at the seams, all of a sudden, tons of producers were dropping projects that were already greenlit and taking family time. And so what's happening is no one wants to look like they're running for the hills, but they're all stepping backwards as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the firing squad hits whoever's left, right?
Yeah.
And that's the case. I mean, the reality is there's definitely much bigger guys than Weinstein who committed far more and far more frequent evils. It's a rotten place.
E. Michael Jones talks about Hollywood casting all of its sins upon a guilty messiah, Harvey Weinstein.
Mm-hmm.
And you think maybe he's just the face of it and not the worst perp.
You know, when you can find a visible enemy to have laser beam focus on, it typically distracts from everything else, right? And so I think that was a necessary sacrifice that all the evil people in Hollywood were perfectly willing to make. And to be quite frank with you, as many people as talk openly about, oh, wow, it's horrible to find out these things about Harvey Weinstein. They don't care. In fact, they probably feel bad for Harvey Weinstein. I think they're all liars. That's just, from my experience, that would be my guess.
Is it possible if, say, I'm a great archangel and money's no object, can an alternative entertainment industry be built outside LA, where the green light people, the ones who control budgets and casting and story premise, are not hard left nihilistic lunatics?
Yeah, so I left about a little over a year ago. I quit my company and I pulled up my stakes, and my plan was to go to Texas and try and do the same thing, but in a different culture, and to there's a huge sort of conservative film industry budding in Texas. And so I thought that was my plan.
Mm-hmm.
And the stopgap was then immediately distribution and all of that, which I knew existed, but I thought with enough conservative filmmakers, we could bridge that hurdle, so to speak.
If I can just press pause for folks who don't know what distribution is, what's that piece of the puzzle?
Distribution is it's the people that release your movies. So it's the theater chains, and it's the network TV, and it's the Netflixes, and anywhere where you watch something, that's distribution. And so you've got Universal, the studios have their own distribution wings. And so that's where the gap suddenly narrows real thin, and there's only a few people in charge, right?
Yep.
Now, I quit after that because I immediately recognized I was going to end up right back in the same place. And my journey as a Catholic was I was acting, and then I said, well, now that I'm a Catholic, I can't just take any job because there's basically no jobs that are morally good. So I'm writing. Okay, well, I still have to take the jobs that people give me, and I can do my best to preserve them. Okay, I'll be a development executive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I ran a development company. And so I kept working my way up the chain to try and get to that magic place where evil people are no longer in charge. And when I got to Texas, I worked really hard for a few months, about killed myself trying to get this company off the ground, and then realized, what am I doing? I'm going to hit the distribution wall, and that's the end of it. Flash forward, I was just in California helping my buddy with this short, and he told me about this TV show that they own their own app, and you download their app and you pay $3 or whatever, and it's not distributed anywhere else, and they're doing really, really well. Now, I don't think that's going to be a common thing immediately, because obviously you have to figure out how to market that. But I think that's the final piece of the pie. The final piece of the pie is if you can control distribution, you can decentralize that and start looking to other avenues.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, finding someone that can make an app, and your show is literally your app, right? I think that could suddenly create an avenue for good Catholics who aren't willing to compromise morals.
Yeah. Because that's the through line from the first domino until the last piece of it before it hits the viewer.
Path to profit, right? You hear that a lot in Hollywood. Well, what's your path to profit? And usually what they mean is what's your distribution.
Yeah, right. Is there a kind of unofficial hierarchy with cardinals, bishops, priests, deacons, under which labor the lay people in Hollywood as there is in the Catholic Church? Is there some dim parallel hierarchical model?
Absolutely. And you have all the same problems, right? So, what ate away at my conscience and at my soul was we knew we were fighting this sort of clandestine war. So we were very conscious of the fact that we could not speak openly about our faith or about conservative beliefs or anything. There was one woman, huge female producer, and we were trying to get the life rights to Glenn Campbell.
Yeah.
And she was partnered with a good old cowboy on it, and he was a normal guy. We showed up to the meeting. We talked to him for like an hour and a half. She was an hour and a half late. We got on like a house on fire with this good old boy. I'm from Texas. We talked. We had a great time. All of a sudden, she shows up, and she's the power in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's no arguing past her. She had made $1 billion plus in box office profits, and she had looked up one of our investors and saw that he was a big Republican donor.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. That was enough. And after an hour and a half, we were guaranteed to get these life rights if it was just this cowboy's decision. And she sat down and said, hey, right away, she said, can you tell me who so-and-so is? Our investor? He's one of our many investors. Okay. Well, I don't have any interest in doing business with you people. So she came an hour and a half late to the meeting just to tell us that she had no interest.
Pure passive aggression. Yeah. Yeah. I probably know who you don't say who it is. I probably know who it is. Wow.
So that hierarchy, this, and you're always hiding from it. Just like good priests today, right? Good priests. Mm-hmm. I think us good Catholics have forgotten discretion. And so we want to post all the fiery homilies that our good priests are courageous enough to say out loud. And then they get, hunted down and sent to Antarctica, right?
Or to the St. Luke Institute for remedial education and therapy.
That's exactly right. So in a way, it's kind of like that, right? You're always sort of cloak and dagger, and you're always kind of wondering who's on your side. And they're out there. I mean, there's political conservatives in Hollywood. There's Christians of different types that, they're out there, but they're all hiding. And so it's hard to find each other and to build a force, right?
The fact that there's such an organization as FOA, Friends of Abe, this kind of clandestine beneath the surface group of.
I know all of them.
What's that?
The Friends of Abe?
Yeah.
I know all of them.
So they have to band together for sanity, because if they went public and went public about being a friend of Abraham Lincoln, that would be it. There really is a blacklist. This is not fevered swamp conspiracy theory. This is the real world.
So I'm going to be as ambiguous as possible while still getting the story clear. I met with one of them who was one of the founding members of that, and he's still a very successful writer. And I was speaking with him about a particular project. That was our reason for meeting. Mm-hmm. And we were in a public cigar lounge. And I thought, he obviously knew where I stood, because the way we met was through mutual friends, right?
Yep.
And so I thought I'd drop a little hint, and it was the most subtle little hint. And it was only me and him and someone else sitting at the table who was also in the same mindset. I dropped the littlest hint, and the fear and sternness on his face. And he said, there will be no discussion of any such topics ever in my presence. All of a sudden, it was like, because this is his livelihood. And we're in a public setting, and it was the subtlest hint that we were on the same page, whether politically or ideologically, whatever. And all of a sudden, I could just see his whole body recoil and shudder. So those guys are very cloak and dagger, because they have to be. He was the showrunner on a huge show, And I mean, he would lose his entire livelihood if people knew where he stood on most things.
Yeah, not taking one drop of validity to that, because that struggle is real. On the other hand, I'm thinking about someone that I've interviewed and met, who I respect a lot, named Todd Komarnicki. Todd wrote Sully, starring Tom Hanks. He produced
Okay.
Elf, and Todd and I have talked about this concept of the Christian underground. And he just said to Patrick, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. When you've been dead in sin and you've been raised from the dead, it's something you want to talk about. And he's found a way to cobble out an explicitly Christian presence. I mean, he doesn't make quote unquote Christian movies. He's definitely swimming in secular waters, but he's like, our gloves should be off. The dragons are so obviously of danger to us that we have to throw down, because there's going to be no, if you're waiting to win 15 Oscars, then you'll mention our Lord, You're
never going to do it. So that you just nailed home exactly why I changed my mind and left. Why I used my video, I had this sudden realization that I always believed this idea that if you want to find out who a man is, give him everything he's ever wanted, right? And I think that's absolutely true. And I think these people who say it's cloak and dagger and everything else, and they are fighting some clandestine war, I think the reality is they're cowards, right? And I love this man that I'm talking about just now. By the way, he's a political conservative. I don't know what his religious beliefs are, but even the political conservatives are sort of in that. It's such a small camp that everyone kind of has banded together, right? And the reality is, at a certain point, I said, this isn't what I want to do.
Yeah.
I would rather be poor and working on a farm in Michigan than running around cloak and dagger, not talking about the most important thing in the world, not the only thing that matters, right? I assisted in an exorcism, funny enough, right before I made my video. And that was the final tumbler. I had been mulling all this stuff over for a year. And it just suddenly hit home that there's nothing else that matters. None of the movies we make are going to mean anything in eternity, right?
Except It's a Wonderful Life, the greatest film ever made, and can ever be made. But go on, sir.
Sure. I mean, I would argue that it's Man for All Seasons, but yeah, it's when I was in Romania, I was relatively a fresh convert. And I had no Catholic friends, and I was filming a show out there for 3 months, and it was rough. I would watch A Man for All Seasons almost every night in the bath while eating room service. And when you're shooting a movie, you're usually working 17 hours a day, right? So you're exhausted, and so I had just enough energy to do all things at once and then go to bed. And that was my routine.
Well, you just kind of proved my thesis. I mentioned that heathens make the best Christian movies. Here's a movie written by an agnostic, lifelong agnostic, Robert Bolt, who went on to write The Mission for Roland Joffe in 1986, directed by a Jew, Fred Zinnemann, about a Catholic saint. The jokes write themselves.
Yeah. It's funny because if you don't have an agenda and you're just looking at history, and you want to tell that history honestly and in a straightforward way that exemplifies the real figures who were involved, it's going to come out Catholic. Because the reality is that these great men were great. We call St. Thomas More a saint for a reason, right? Yeah. And if you try to tell his story, you're going to get a saint out of it every time.
There's a reason why it's called the greatest story ever told, right?
Yeah.
So this is my soapbox speech, that the stories that participate in the most vivid way to the greatest story ever told are the ones that resonate in every language and every time. Yeah. Because it's think of the people listening who've ever tried to write a screenplay. You've probably read Sid Field and maybe William Goldman, Blake Snyder, Linda Seeger, all the theorists.
Robert McKee, all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, Rob McKee. You got a beginning, in the middle, and the end. As David Mamet, whose masterclass is fantastic. He says it's got to be in that order unless it's a French film, which is why French films suck. But so we have... what's that?
They do. And he's right. They absolutely do.
So you have beginning, middle, end. You've got creation. You have the loss, paradise lost. And then you have the reconciliation through Christ our Lord, in which we don't go back to the garden. We fall upward. It's just beautiful how it all hangs together. Story
theory is my, I mean, that was my bread and butter for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably, not probably, it's definitely a much deeper passion than even acting for me. Developing stories and selling stories was what I loved more than anything. And the funny thing is when you get in those rooms and you're debating story direction with Netflix executives or whoever.
Yep.
You can use general universal language and overcome almost every evil, right? Because if you tell a great story, you're usually excluding evils. For something to be good, it necessarily has to exclude evil. So I found really clever ways over the years to drive these stories in the right direction, and to talk about things like, universal value systems that appeal to all people in all places and all times, which of course is sort of the definition of Catholic, right? But but you don't say that. You just say, I think this would be a broader story if we applied this value system rather than this one, because this one is going to appeal to a smaller crowd and it's harder to sell. And so you can use all their own terms against them. And then you hit that sort of PC wall, though, the stay woke wall that you can't really get past anymore. You used to be able to, but that wall is closed quickly.
I think the idea that you were talking about earlier is heading in the right direction of an app. So from enter and in the first scene to when people watch it, because you have to control that whole sluice, right? The whole luge track has got to be under your authority. Otherwise, you're beholden to someone else who's going to write a check, and that's when the hockey tape begins to go over your mouth. But I'm going to ask you about how left unprotested, left with no other competitors to create good stories. By good, I don't mean churchy. What was your reaction to something like Cuties, the really a pedophile grooming film that was so much touted and sold by Netflix? Because they're almost, I feel like someone out there is daring me to object to it. It's like Rachel Levine. I dare you to object to this.
That's exactly, I think, what they want. I think at this point, evil is always pride, right? Whether it's the pride of the flesh or intellectual pride, evil is always some form of pride, and some lack of humility. I mean, that's the humility being living in accord with the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's always going to get to that point. It's always going to eventually reach this point of gloating and taunting. It's why serial killers, the old trope of the serial killer that just has to leave clues for the cop, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's just part of fallen human nature. And once they reach that point where they don't think there's any possibility of intervention, they start gloating. And sometimes enough people can rally together to raise a fuss.
Yeah.
But not really, not consistently. I think the reality is every moral hill was worth dying on over the last few hundred years, and we kept waiting for the big battle,
Yeah.
And now we have Q to thank for it. Right? I mean, that's now we have battles that just seem absurd because we capitulated.
Mm-hmm. Got some comments and questions. Ordinarily I wouldn't, but since you put her name, it's Stacy Sims. I lived down the road from Bug Hall's family when we were kids. So Stacy says hi.
Stacy, hi.
Yeah, already did. She says legit, lovely family, and follows up. Many people probably remember him from Little Rascals. Wow, Patrick, great question. I forget which question she's referring to. It's a few minutes ago. I worry about this all the time. My husband is into film, and I fear that my eldest wants to be an actor. It terrifies me. So
Follow your conscience. If it terrifies you, that's telling you something, and you should follow that instinct.
that's pretty simple advice, isn't it? Just your gut is, God is a genius, right? So God's putting his truth into your conscience. And we can, I came out of a background of theological dissent, and I have a phrase I coined in my book on Humana Vitae, theology according to Jiminy Cricket. There's a false way to understand that, follow your conscience. It's as long as it's not formed, then it becomes navel-gazing and rationalizing any misbehavior you want to do. But there's a true way to approach it.
Yeah, so I had that experience. That was my big leaving Hollywood moment. Was I came into the church through tradition, and I had brilliant. I can't thank God enough for the brilliant minds that I got to learn from. But a lot of those brilliant minds have fallen into the sort of the further extreme of almost a kind of rational principlism, right? Where you forget that you have a conscience and you think it's a math equation, right? Well, this supersedes this principle, and therefore, in these situations, it's actually the principle of double effect that's in play. And it's remote cooperation and it's this very complicated math equation in your mind, right? Now, maybe St. Thomas always thought that way when he was making moral decisions. I don't know. But I suddenly realized that I had ample opportunity to make the right choices, and I knew what they were, right? I was a well-formed Catholic. I knew what the right decision was when someone was telling me, well, we don't technically have to pay this guy because technically we didn't receive the script that we had discussed, and and I again and again and again and again, right? Until you go, my conscience is eating me alive, and I know better, right? But I'm listening to the rationalization. Principles are objective and they are true, but very smart men can use principles to justify anything, right?
Yeah, the legalism that you see in the action of demons. I've interviewed 3 or 4 exorcists, and the devils are very legalistic. They know where the line is. And so I've heard the story many times from many Catholics in the entertainment industry that the worst treatment they tend to get is from fellow Catholics. They scrimp, they cut corners, they're unprofessional. You'd think that their motivation would be to exceed the standard of what's fair and what's just and what's right in a way that, an atheist secular CEO would never treat you that way. But hey, there's a lot of room under the bus.
And that was my main motive when I went to start my own company. I said, you know what? I'm going to do it right. And then I read Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and I said, you know what? I don't want to. I don't want that burden. Maybe I will do it right, but also maybe I won't. And you know what? I need to just get to heaven. I don't need to worry about all the other Catholic filmmakers who aren't being treated fairly and trying to create some safe haven for them. I just need to get to heaven. And that became my motive, and everything else just fell away.
How do you spend your hours nowadays as a gentleman farmer? What's your typical day look like?
It's random tasks. So we're building the homestead right now. So I'm sort of engineering the barn and figuring out what I want there. We'll have a beef cow, we'll have goats, we'll have chickens, we'll have bees. We'll have a full day's work every day. Right now it's a lot of building projects. I wake up right around the time the sun's coming up, and I get to work building, and I build until, the sun's going down. And what's nice is my daughters get to see me exercising that virtue. They get to spend time with me. My daughter loves being out working with me, and I'll find random tasks that she thinks she's helping with, and I can, she wants to ask questions all day. Daddy, tell me about when Jesus went up to Mount Golgotha.
Yep.
And so while we're working, we can just talk. We can spend all day exercising virtue together and talking about the things that matter.
You're building decades and decades of happy memories. Most people under the age of 15 are so connected, over-connected to the digital world to the dumbed down friendship of Facebook to the latest TikTok thing, and it's just frying so many young brains. So kudos for keeping them close to the land. There's something simple about that and beautiful.
Yeah, but it's an effect of the culture. I think a lot of people miss that. They think there's a separation between these ideas. When we removed fathers from the home, like if you think about all of human history, men worked at home. They had the field. They were shepherds. They were farmers. If they had a shop, they lived above the shop, and they had their, blacksmithing or their leather working or whatever it was that they did, right?
Next to the sun, yeah.
Next to the sun, and all the children got the benefit of seeing their father exercising virtue all day. Now, men are, let's say they're just as virtuous. I don't know that I would believe that if someone tried to argue it, but let's say that the same men existed today. Well, their children are only seeing them in their leisure hours. They disappear in the morning. They don't know what they do all day. All they know of their father is when he gets home. And even if he's a good Catholic man and he comes home and he plays with them and he spends time with them and he tries to, feed them some catechesis, like a fire hose, in the little time he has with them, that it's not sufficient. We're just not made like that. We need to see our father exercising virtue. We learn through storytelling, and storytelling is a kind of observation of reality, so.
Yeah, it's a good definition of a story, isn't it? An observation about reality.
Yeah, and I think that all the TikToks and the things you mentioned, I think those exist because we need to replace that missing, that gap, right? Because there is no time spent with our fathers for a large portion of the day. We need something to fill that. We need something to teach us. We need storytelling. And so what do? We consume TV, and now it's YouTube, and then it's TikTok and Facebook, and something's going to fill that gap. I personally think we need to unplug from the system and face their fears and go do something hard, raise some cattle, and just spend time with their kids. I think we'd be a lot better off for it, and I bet the world would change relatively quickly within a generation or two.
Just thinking about your summary there, and it occurs to me that all those, whether it's Snapchat or TikTok or YouTube or Facebook video, Instagram, they're all micro stories, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're micro stories. We're plugged into quickly a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah. Every joke is a micro story, right?
Yep.
Story is a beginning, a middle, and end, and then there has to be a subversion of expectations, right? Those are sort of the parts of a story. A joke is that. Stories can be very, very, very small. And that's what we're doing. When we're scrolling through Twitter, we're ingesting tiny, tiny micro stories. Something subverts our expectations, and we immediately want to engage with it, right?
Yeah, right. Jennifer Johnson Barnett, one of our valued Nationistas. What about some of the, you can punt if you don't know, obviously. What about some of the Christian projects Mark Burnett and Roma Downey have tried to make? Any room under that umbrella for Catholic projects? Just curious.
I knew them when I had my development company. So, we sent them stuff all the time. I think they're decent people. For me personally, I didn't want to participate in Protestant projects. All you're doing in that situation is you're sliding the bar down a little, right? You're sliding the bar of like what you can and can't say and do and not do. You're just kind of moving that down. And that was just a moment for me. That was a moment that I realized I'm still going to be in the same situation, essentially. Yeah, it's not objective. Well, it is objective evil, right? Heresy is evil, but it's a different kind of evil, but still. And their heart's in the right place, right? There's lots of people with their hearts in the right place that are trying to do good. I know for a fact that one of their motives is to, bring about a cultural reviving. And so good for them. And if that's fine with you, if you're a filmmaker and you say, it's a lesser of two evils and you think you could do some good there, go do it.
I always look back to 1993 and 1994 when a guy by the name of Mel Gibson blew the lid off a massive multi-100 million person viewing audience out there that the mainstream Hollywood machine was overlooking. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that the Passion of the Christ opened up a lot of doors and made young filmmakers think, maybe I don't have to keep the Christian premise quite so in the oven or on the back burner.
But they closed that door very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem.
In the form of not wanting other successes like it, you mean?
What's that?
In the form of not wanting other successes like it?
Oh, in the form of controlling all the other successes like it.
I see.
So Netflix has a Christian department now. They have a faith-based department now, and it's all of them do. Every studio has a faith-based department, and they're very selective about what they filter through, to the point where it's non-substantive, right? Almost everything that filters through now is silly nonsense that in no way represents my beliefs. I don't know, I'm
Right.
not speaking for anyone else out there, but a lot of it is almost Gnosticism, right? And the stuff that isn't is just really bad soapbox preaching that
Sort of
that they
pablum-y.
know isn't going to have the effect, right?
Right.
They know
Mhm.
it's not going to change any culture. It's not going to counter their efforts to move in a certain direction.
Yeah. Do you have a book in you about your experience, Bug? Have you been asked about a book in the pipeline?
I have, yeah, I write a lot. So I've been dabbling with outlines and stuff, and maybe I'll do that someday. I really don't know. I'm dabbling with all kinds of little things, little stories that
Mm-hmm.
maybe it'll be about me or maybe not, but I never stop writing. So we'll see what comes of it.
You can't stop it, can you?
No,
And it
it's
wouldn't
always
be
there.
it would be a sin to stop it. Would be repudiating a gift.
I've gone back and forth on that, and I do think that we sometimes forget that we can use our gifts in small ways, right?
Mhm.
So my role in the family, just because of the dynamic of my family, what works for us, we co-sleep. So every night I'm the one that sleeps with the kids. So I say it's story time, and they all jump up and down and they get excited, and I lay there and I tell them a 30-minute story out of my head, right? And then we say our prayers and we go to sleep. That's become such a ritual for my children. And they're all allegories. They're all, sometimes they're a mess because it's hard to tell a story off the cuff.
Mhm.
But every once in a while, every third night, I'll just nail one. And I'll even have myself choked up. And I'll be like, man, this story is phenomenal.
Why didn't I record this?
Well, what's great is kids love to hear the same stories over and over. They
That's
need
right.
to in order
That's
to
right.
contextualize them. So I'll remember it for the most part,
Mhm.
and I'll tell that same story 3, 4, sometimes 5 nights in a row. And you can tell when they're getting bored of it because they'll start asking about other things. Can there be a wolf in this story this time?
Yeah.
And so that's our routine. And you know what? If that's the only way that I ever use the gift that God gave me, that's enough. That's not lesser than. So I don't know
Yeah,
what will
yeah.
come of it, right? It might just be for me, and it might just be for my children.
Sure. Let me close with this. Mike Glowacki. Michael, I keep stumbling over your surname. I'm addressing people who are members of Coffin Nation here. Please ask Bug about his library behind him and his reading list, please. What's the indispensable kind of, you don't have to give an official top 10, but what are your go-tos? What are your rereads? What do you recommend for Catholics to go deeper?
I always circle back around to Frank Sheed. I love,
Amen,
love,
brother.
love.
Preach it. Changed
Yeah,
my life.
I can, for some reason, I never get sick of Frank Sheed. It's another one that I find myself rereading almost once a year, and it's small, but it's a completely different experience the more I grow in my spiritual life. And that's The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis. Every time I read that, I find myself relating to a different character. I find myself on different sides of the coin. That's an interesting one to continue to read as you grow in the spiritual life. Let's see, what else? St. Thomas. I love St. Thomas on the Gospels. I never was good at school.
Mm-hmm.
And I suddenly realized the people that are great at anything, it's because they love, right? when I started opening St. Thomas and opening the corresponding gospel and opening the corresponding Lapide, right? So he's giving a commentary on Lapide, who's giving a commentary on the gospel. And you go through that chain and you read the commentary on the commentary on the commentary. And it's like detective work, and it never stops being fun for me.
Yep.
I love the encyclicals. Pope Leo is special to me. I do like Pope Emeritus Benedict the 16th. He was a big part of my reading when I first converted.
Are you familiar with the Catena Aurea? It's
Catena Aurea. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Thomas cobbles together every patristic comment from Matthew verse 1 to the end of John's Gospel, and it's just endless golden stuff. Really cool. I'll put that in.
I've got it back there. I'm still working on this commentary on Lapide, but I do want to get to that one.
Yep, there it is. I thought you were going to say The 3 Ways of the Spiritual Life by Father Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange, who was
I love Lagrange.
Yeah, he was the dissertation director of one of the 2 doctorates that a young Polish priest named Father Karol Wojtyła earned in Rome. And it's if you're familiar with the book, it's a distillation of 2 much bigger books by Garrigou-Lagrange. He's sort of a Thomist of the old school. Didn't go for any of this. He's just like the anti-modernist Thomist, and it's so rich. The prose is just not 1 ounce of fat on it.
That's been my experience when I've read him. I love him. There's so much of his work, though. I mean, he's got a mountain of work.
Yeah.
Not the degree of St. Thomas, but it's a mountain of work. And the priest that converted me is always recommending various works of his. So I love him. Go ahead. It's tough. That's one of those questions that always gets you. You have to look at it again, and kind of figure it out. And then I love history. I'm always pouring through the history. History to me is the practical application of moral theology. I love reading moral theology. I love the abstraction of human nature and figuring out why we are the way we are and what we are, right, as human beings and how we relate to God. But then when you look at history, you see it applied again and again and again in all these different circumstances.
Yeah, I just endorsed one of my favorite books of history ever. It's brand new. You can't seem to write a book less than 500 words. That's Logos Rising by E. Michael Jones. The Logos of history, always drawing greater goods out of evils. Someone's asking about PureFlix, a viable option. I guess that's a personal decision, right?
Yeah, that's another one of those. If you think you can do some good there and you want to go do it. At one point, I had a couple of those avenues open to me, and I won't specify any of them, but and it took some soul searching for me to go, okay, I'm a radical Catholic. I'm an absolute extremist in my faith, and I don't want to do the dance with Protestants. I love our Protestant brothers and sisters. My actual brother is a fundamentalist Baptist youth minister, and we have some great conversations. We had to learn how to talk to each other, and now we do have some great conversations. But I don't want to do that dance at work anymore, whether it's whether with purely evil people or even just our Protestant brothers who are immersed in their heresy. I want to live peacefully. So that's my own personal decision.
Sure.
We're taking a vow of poverty, and we're just taking a step back from the world and going to live simply.
The Gospel Without Compromise says in the book titled by a servant of God, Catherine Doherty. I mentioned her to you, the founders of Madonna House. It's
Madonna House.
Yeah. Someone else is, of course, mentioning the great Bishop Sheen. I'm sure you're a Sheenster as I am.
I do. I love Bishop Sheen. His work, knowing Christ, I think is the title. I think that's the title of it.
Life of Christ. That's kind of
Life of Christ.
It's his kind of magnum opus. It cobbles together a lot of his previous writing from 1958.
Okay, it's probably that one. I read it years ago, and it just knocked me for a loop.
Yeah, he's fantastic. Total genius prophet. philosopher. Yeah. Well, look,
Yeah.
what's the closest distance between people and you? Follow you on Twitter, website? What's the connectivity?
Yeah, I'm still on Twitter and Instagram. I don't know how much longer. I don't know what the future holds for me still. So,
Yep.
but that's definitely where I am. I do have a YouTube channel. It's got the one video on there, and maybe I'll find some way to utilize that in some way.
Awesome.
For
Well,
now, I'm just building things and preparing for animals.
awesome sauce. Sounds idyllic. I've enjoyed our time, Bug. Thanks for joining us. I know the comments are through the roof. You can count on our prayers, and let's do it again sometime. Maybe when the crazy ends, we can get together.
Yeah, well, I'm grateful for you having me, and to everyone watching, thank you.
Wonderful. All right, Bug Hall. This it's been an opportunity to grow and learn. And sorry, what? Yeah, if you want to join, and this is the kind of conversation we have all the time inside Coffin Nation, go to coffinnation.com. Find out what folks in over 20 countries enjoy every single day, in season and out. With that, I'll bid you adieu and say, be a saint. What else is there?